Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end-of-life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Today's episode, From Compassion to Calling, The Road to Becoming a Death Doula, promises to be deeply insightful for those who want to become end-of-life doulas. Joining me is end-of-life doula Rae Gutierrez. Together, we're going to answer your questions on becoming death doulas and share stories from our personal journeys of some of our challenges, the learning curves, and the profound fulfillment that comes with this calling. So whether you're considering becoming a death doula or are simply interested in understanding more about this essential role in end-of-life care, this episode is for you. Rae, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Traci, thank you for having me. I am really honored to be here and very, very excited to talk about our journeys today.
Rae, before we answer some of the questions that were sent in to us, can you start off by telling everyone a bit about how you became a death doula?
Absolutely. And I will try to keep this brief. I do tend to ramble on because this sort of journey has been so important to me. So I was effectively called to become a death doula about 4 years ago. I have always been a part of the healthcare community, mental health community, but I was starting to sort of search for something else. I was starting to feel restless, and I really wanted to get back into serving my community. And there was a very specific incident that called me, as I said, to being a death doula. A very good friend of my family had developed ALS, and it progressed, unfortunately, very, very rapidly. And our friend got to a point where she was wheelchair bound, very, very limited movement of her hands. And the next phase for her to continue living was actually to be given a tracheotomy and put on a ventilator. And at that point, our friend decided that that was not the journey for her. She was suffering both physically and emotionally, and was done and didn't want to suffer anymore. So she chose an option that we have here in California called MAIDS, or medical aid in dying. Went through the process with her doctor and medical organization. It was a very long, drawn out, difficult process, but she finally got approved. But what happened was they gave her the instructions on how to mix the medications and sent her home. They gave her no other support. It was, here it is, go, and good luck. And for our friend, this was actually a huge challenge. One, because of her limited mobility, she was going to need assistance. She wasn't going to be able to mix the medications. She was going to need assistance even in self-administering because of her limited movements. And no one had given her any advice or ideas on how to actually accomplish this. Another huge part of the problem was her family was adamantly against her going through that process. It was very emotional, very difficult, and it got to a point where our friend had no help. Her family was not going to help her at all. She had tried to bring in some friends from out of town, and the family essentially scared them off and threatened them with legal action. And Carrie Ann was just left alone and had no help, especially from her family. So she had reached out to us and asked us for assistance. She had arranged a day. She had managed to get her children out of the home, and she had asked us to come and help. And we, of course, did. Once we got there, it was very, very difficult. Her husband was there. He was very adamant about what was going to happen. We ended up spending hours crying, arguing, talking through, and essentially getting her husband to a place where he was ready to not only accept her decision, but be present and be with her in a positive way. So after several hours of struggling, we got to a point where everyone was finally in acceptance. And there was a huge shift in the room when the acceptance came in. The husband, this family was Muslim, and he went and put on these beautiful prayers. They're either sung or chanted. I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly, but they were beautiful, and it just gave the room and the atmosphere a lightness and a peace that was desperately needed. So we went about what we needed to do. We figured out how to help her self-administer. We did what we needed to do. And we stayed until she passed. And then we left to let the husband reach out to whomever they needed to reach out to and get the rest of the process rolling. But when we got to the car, my husband and I were just devastated. Not so much, I mean, we were devastated that our friend had just passed. That I think is a given. But we just felt like there had to be a better way to do this. To just be given the medication and sort of put out on your own without any guidance, emotional support, spiritual support, practical support on even how to get that done. And after that day, ironically, I started seeing articles about death doulas. And I started reading and learning more about what we do. And it just, a light bulb went off. And I just said, this is me. This is what I want to do. I have experience with death and dying. And it just felt right. So at that point, I went and started pursuing my education and training about a year ago. And I'm now a practicing death doula.
So let's start with the questions that were sent in. And thank you to those who did send us questions. I really appreciate it. And the first one, what specific training or certifications are required to become a death doula? Oh, did you want to start with this one or did you want me to?
I certainly don't mind starting, but I would love to hear what you have to say. Currently, death doulas, end-of-life doulas are not regulated by any government or state, federal entity. So specific training or certifications are not required to start practicing. However, that being said, I believe it's extremely important that you do get training. There are several organizations out there that provide training and even a path to certification. There are other death doulas who offer training and run their own schools. There's an incredible amount of information in books and in web series. There are so many ways to learn about how to be a death doula and everything that's involved. And I personally feel that unless you've had some kind of entry or education into the roles and responsibilities of what we do, it would be very, very difficult to actually know how to get started.
Yeah, and this is a non-medical role, so you don't have to be a nurse, you don't have to be a psychologist or a social worker to do it. I agree with Rae that you should have some type of training, and there are lots of them. When you look for training, there is NADA and there is the National End of Life Doula Alliance, and there's ANELDA, that's the International End of Life Doula Association. I know that ANELDA does have training, but when you're looking for training, what's really important is you get this training and then you're kind of left on your own. And there are schools where you actually get mentoring after. And yeah, I'm going to do a call out to the Gentle Passage Collective up in Seattle, because I know they do an excellent job at mentoring the people that go through them. And even if you don't go through them, they do a wonderful job at just mentoring, period. But that training is kind of like a high level first, like a level 1 training. And even after that you need to continue to get education. I know that I do a lot of grief work, and I got a lot of education, and I'm still get education through different schools. My favorite being the Institute for Birth, Breath, and Death. They do an excellent job. So, but yeah, that continuation, I know I got a lot more education on advanced directives and that work. So it is, and I know that you've done considerable post-certification education also.
Absolutely. I think the one thing to say about being an end-of-life doula is you have to be committed to lifelong learning. This is not a one and done kind of education or training. Things are happening, research, new ideas, all the time. And it's just so important to always be looking, learning, and striving for more information.
So the next one, what are the most important skills needed to become an effective end-of-life doula?
You want to start?
I would say listening, but active listening, really a lot of active listening. You should be comfortable with the uncomfortable, because you're going to be working with people and their families, people who are crying. There'll be lots of silences, silent pauses. You need good self-care. And I would say you even need a good business sense also, because you have to open up your practice.
Yes. And if you don't have a good business sense, you're going to have to learn. Again, back to that lifelong learning. I 100% agree with everything that you just said. I think, probably some of the most important skills, you said it, deep, active listening, which really requires, being able to validate what your clients and families are saying to you, being able to reflect back so you can actually demonstrate that understanding. And as you mentioned, being comfortable with silences and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. We do have to ask a lot of really serious, personal, and sometimes invasive questions. And that can be challenging for both the client and for you to even ask. So I agree. I think that being comfortable with being uncomfortable, being comfortable with those silences are a huge part of active listening. Empathy and compassion also. If you aren't able or willing to put yourself in other shoes and understand, or at least attempt to understand what they're feeling and what they're going through and what they need, and to reach back out to them with compassion and no judgment. We are a judgment-free space. And I think that's a huge important skill, because we all bring our own beliefs and biases with us, but we really do have to leave those at the door. We've talked a little bit about, communication skills, but I think another huge thing is we have to understand end of life and the process itself, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It's very hard for us to walk and hold space for someone if we truly don't understand what's about to happen. We need to also be comfortable giving practical support, although we're not medical. There's going to be times where, maybe we need to help somebody figure out how to brush their teeth, or, get up and out of bed, or maybe even just read at their bedside. But that practical support is going to be huge. The other thing I think that's important, and is a skill that's extremely important for an end-of-life doula, is setting boundaries. It can be very easy to let those boundaries blur and start moving into areas that either not are part of our scope of practice, or maybe are outside of our hours. But again, we must set boundaries as part of the work that we do. And I think lastly, what we talked about, I've mentioned this 3 times now, is a skill of lifelong learning and being a self-starter. You must go find the information. Don't expect it to come find you.
How can I develop a deeper understanding of the emotional and spiritual needs of those at the end of life?
Yeah, that's actually kind of a tough one, and it's not something that comes quick. Depending on what you bring with you. First of all, what experiences you bring with you will also be helpful. But, developing a deeper understanding is, again, education, really understand and learning about what challenges folks that are facing the end of life have, understanding what they're going to go through, as we spoke about. Deep active listening, and again, that no judgment, be culturally competent. Again, leave your own biases and beliefs at the door, and make sure that they understand that you're there to help hold space for them and what they want and need. And I think finally, listen and learn from others. We've talked about mentorship and how important that is. Asking questions and that deep active listening, and being a trustworthy ear to those who need you, are really, really going to help you develop that deeper understanding.
I think it's also important to, from a spiritual perspective, to understand those spiritualities that aren't your norm. Um, I have my own spiritual beliefs, but I've read parts of the Gita, uh, the Lotus Sutra, all different, uh, the Bible, the Quran, and these aren't my spiritualities per se, but I really strive to understand because it is so important in many people's lives. So, and also walking beside the person, really listen to them and their families because we're there to walk beside them and to let them lead a lot of times.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Agree.
Okay, so the next one. How do you build trust and rapport with a new client and their family? Oh, that's an interesting one. It really, every single family is different. Every single conversation I have is different. And so whenever I meet someone new, I, you know, I take and I just really listen. As I said, I go in with a very open mind, and I take their lead. I also make sure that I come prepared. If they contact me, they usually give me some information about themselves on the email or however they decide to contact me. And so I always try
Yes.
to do some research beforehand if I don't know something about their illness or if I have any other concerns.
Yeah. I think that's huge, right? Showing up prepared, professional, engaged, and ready to go. I think that from the gate is huge. Um, for me, in terms of building trust and rapport, one, I realize that that's going to take time. I don't expect to walk into someone's home and automatically be trusted and respected. There's some level where where I feel prove myself, and the best way for me to do that is to be authentic and genuine. The minute I start trying to act or be someone that I'm not, or if I try to pretend too hard to be someone I think they want me to be, it just comes across as disingenuous, and it doesn't build trust. So, especially because I want these folks to know who I am. If I'm going to be with them for a long time on their journey, I want them to know who's going to be walking alongside them. So again, being genuine, being authentic. I loved what you said about like being professional and prepared. Right. They don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste theirs. I think is huge. Being present, and being accountable and following up, I think is also huge. Even though what we do is a very emotional, spiritually based type of work, we are still professionals. And it's really, really important that we do what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it and within the time frame we're going to do it. And I think probably the other biggest thing with building trust and rapport is being culturally sensitive. We've talked a little bit about this, and competent, and being there for them, to hold space for them and what they need, to be there to advocate for their needs, and to help them move forward, right, with dignity and a sense of autonomy and control over what is happening to them and the types of decisions. So I think if once they realize that we're not coming in to tell them what to do or how to do it, but we're there to support, provide guidance and education to allow them, like you said, to let them lead. And then we're just there to sort of advocate and support. And I think once we stay in our lanes and sort of share that information and do that consistently throughout our interactions, over time, that will build trust and rapport.
Yeah, and I love how you talk about authenticity because in our role, we do a lot of very different things. And sometimes those things that we're asked to do are new to us. So it's the first time we've done parts of that job. And that honesty that we can show and say, okay, let me do the research. I don't know. Let me do the research, because we know so many people. I might not know, but let me tell you, I know my friend Rae might know. So I'm going to contact her and ask the questions. So I, being that having that honesty with the people that you're working with is very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see, what are some of the common challenges faced when working with terminally ill patients, and how can they be addressed?
That's a good one, because 90% of what we do is problem solve. At least in my opinion, I feel like that is. I'll jump in just because I have it right here in front of me. But I think you're going to have several sets of challenges in general. There's always going to be either emotional distress or heightened distress of emotions, or heightened presentation of emotions with folks that are facing end of life decisions. And you're certainly going to get that with their family. You need to know how to be able to be present for that and hold space for that without amplifying that, which I have seen happen. But really being there and connecting and understanding where a person's at, how you need to meet them, and to hold space for them. They're going to go through a range of emotions that aren't always pretty. And a lot of times they're going to be afraid to express those. So being in a safe space with a safe person is going to be huge to those challenges. Another huge challenge is just going to be pain and symptom management for a lot of folks, right? Although we may not be the ones prescribing and giving medication, we can certainly help understand where a client is with their pain and their symptoms, help educate family, connect with hospice if need to. But, if someone's in pain or has terrible anxiety or fear, they're not living their life with joy or to their fullest. And that truly for me is going to be the end game. Other dynamics that can be challenging in family. I mean, I think let's call that what it is. Family for me, has usually been the biggest challenge. And most of the time is because that they have different wants and wishes for their family member who's dying than the family member themselves. And being the client's advocate is one of the most important things you can do to help navigate that challenge. You are there to make sure the client is served and is getting what they need. And helping educate the family and helping support the family is certainly part of the job. But again, the challenge is sometimes with family, making sure they understand that you are there to advocate for the client and their needs, and getting the family on board and along. Again, definitely a challenge.
And sometimes that client might be the person who's actually paying for it might be the son or daughter of the person who's ill, but you still, like, my biggest goal is that quality of life for that person who's sick, and making sure that quality of life is as good as can be for what they want. They need to lead that discussion. And I'd also say the fear that not only the person who is ill, but their family members have a lot of fear. And sometimes the family members have more fear than the person who is actually ill and dying. And it's the education that, hey, this is what might happen. This is what you can, that this is what might happen. But also, some of that fear is, some of that education, or I won't even say that it's education, but with working with that fear is just being there for the family members and listening and really being present, because the family and the person who's ill is they're already grieving. And
Yes.
so it is walking with them through that grief. And lastly, what I see a lot, besides for what you've spoken about, Rae, is person who is ill. A lot of times I see that they're just in this bed and they don't have a TV. People aren't really, I mean, people are talking with them, but they're, how many hours a day can a person be present at the bedside? Boredom. I see people just staring off into space, and it's not because they're out of it. It's because they're bored. So a good companion, a good caregiver, that's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What does the typical scope of work for a death doula include? A lot. It is
Yes.
anything that the client needs from the time the person is ill and even before a person is ill. I know I've helped clients who want to go into assisted living because they're starting to need it, and choosing that facility from, and working on advanced directives and other planning even before the person is sick. And that's when I really love people who are thinking about not only not only their wills and their trusts, and who are working with estate attorneys, but who are also thinking about that living will or that advanced directive. And so, I work with people from that very beginning point through companioning, sitting with people as they're in bed or as they start to get ill. I do a lot of grief work with people, and I also do a lot of visual planning and visual sitting. But I would say the majority of my work right now comes in the pre-planning and the grieving, the grief coaching, the grief, the grief work that I do. And I do also visual work, but usually people are coming to me way beforehand or unfortunately after they have been through the experience.
So for me, like you said, I think death doulas wear many, many hats. And I think I joke, but I think it's true. I think some of our biggest, part of our scope of duty is being a problem solver, being an advocate, being an educator, and sometimes a crisis counselor. And the reason I say that is we are trained to do, and just sort of very generally, as you mentioned, right, we're trained to do the planning, even from before someone receives a diagnosis, but is starting to think about, the choices that they might want to make for their healthcare, their end of life choices. What kind of funeral services do they want, right? So we're going to walk them through, like you mentioned, the advanced planning, the vigil planning, end of life planning, all of those things. We are very well versed and trained to do that. So planners, problem solvers, educators, definitely. One of the things, I mentioned sometimes also is just practical assistance. A lot of us have specialties or come with extra skills. For example, I am a meditation guide and instructor. So a lot of what I will do with patients, especially if they're scared and if they want, is either guided meditation or teaching them how to do deep breathing exercises to manage their own fears. But again, that's a skill that I come with. But so I think of that sometimes as practical assistance. Again, maybe it's just getting somebody a glass of water or sitting at their bedside because a family member needs to not run away, but needs to go to an appointment or needs a break. That companionship, that presence is a huge part of what we do. Another piece that we do is legacy work, depending on what the client needs. I actually love this part of the work that we do because this can really be just anything that is a way to start compiling memories and presenting them in a way that makes sense for you and your family, but so you can have those memories and those things after you pass to leave for your family. The grief support that you mentioned is actually a huge part of what we do as well. I know you definitely specialize in grief work. I provide basically support and peer counseling to my clients and their families up to a year after someone has passed, and even beyond that if needed. And the other thing we do is helping get connected to resources. And you mentioned this briefly about like maybe helping a client find an assisted living facility. It could also be something like helping interview hospice providers or home health care providers. Or maybe the grief that someone is going through is beyond my scope and they need an actual licensed therapist. I can help them find one. So that resource connection as well, getting them connected to their community and keeping them connected to their community, I think is also a huge sort of part of our scope of work.
And I think that education beyond just the families, but within the community, because we don't talk about death and grieving at all, mostly. So it's that community outreach and outreach to the medical community. I can't tell you how many doctors just don't talk about the realities of death and and having that conversation with them that it's okay. It's okay
Yes.
to be very honest with
Yes,
with your client or with your patient.
absolutely. Yeah. Education is such a huge part of what we do.
Um, Next one, are there any legal or ethical boundaries that a death doula should be aware of?
I personally think there's quite a few. Traci, I'm not sure how you feel about that, but I definitely feel there are several areas that we need to be aware of. We just talked about scope of practice, and that to me is first and foremost. When you sit with a client, normally you're going to sit down and talk very clearly about the services that you provide and the services you don't provide. Even though I come with a medical and a healthcare background, that is not my scope as a death doula. I'm not going to be administering medications. I'm not going to be giving actual medical advice. I can get people connected to education and resources, but I'm not there to convince, manipulate, or tell anyone what I think they should do. I'm there to provide them with the information that they need so they can make a great informed choice for themselves. I think that's a huge area, right? It's just sticking to your lane. Um, Confidentiality is huge, right? Like I don't come home and start talking to my family about Grandma Smith and her family and all the drama that I just, came through. Um, what my clients are going through, their names, their information, their diagnosis, all of those things are confidential. I only will speak about those things to whoever the client is giving me permission to speak to. If I need to speak about a client, I'm going to reach out to one of my mentors, or to one of my own support groups that I can talk through. I don't need to give patient name, but I can talk through a challenge that I might be having and still protect the confidentiality. Um, Boundaries, right? Boundaries really are huge. You've got to be able to set them and make sure that the client as well understands, again, your scope of practice, but also your boundaries. For example, I have general working hours, I have general working days. There are things that I want you to call me about. There are things that are probably not appropriate for you to call me about. So we're going to set those boundaries and those terms and conditions right up front. And I think that really does help with a lot of the legal and ethical concerns. And I think the last thing I'll say about that is, we've talked about this, but being culturally sensitive and competent and open-minded. It is not my job to convince anyone of my own spiritual beliefs or practices. That's not why I'm there. If they want to, we can certainly have a conversation about what each other believes, but my job is to not push any of that. It's to honor their beliefs and their culture and what they need. And I feel if I were to start moving outside of that, that would be definitely an ethical issue that I could have, and could definitely make clients at the very least feel uncomfortable and not trust me as much as I would like them to.
And I agree with everything that you've covered. Even though we're non-medical, because doulas are non-medical, there is that definite boundary.
Yes.
And if you look at anything that Anelda or Netta that they have in their bylaws, they both say we're non-medical. Even though we're non-medical, I still look at some of the medical boundaries or some of the medical laws, the HIPAA laws, and some of those other things that are in place for the medical community, and I follow those also.
Yes.
that confidentiality, because it feeds into that confidentiality and a whole bunch of other things. I also think, speaking to people who want to become end of life doulas, as far as legalities, there is a whole big business perspective also of having a contract, because that sets those expectations. And some of them are, hey, what am I going to do for you? What do you need? And some of them are, what do I need as a doula? Like I have in my contract that I will not go anywhere. I won't go into a household where people are smoking. I just won't do that. And I'm sure if I, had some other allergies or something, I would probably put those in there also. But so, those things that you see in a business, an effective business, as far as contracts, as far as talking to a lawyer when you need to, setting up your business, those things are also very true as a death doula.
Yes, absolutely. And excellent points. Excellent points.
Okay, let's see. How do you manage your own emotions while providing support to those who are dying and their loved ones? And the next one I see here is how can you share some self-care strategies that are effective for death doula? So I think these go hand in hand. As far as handling my own or managing my own emotions, especially when a person is passing away and the family is going through what they need to go through, I'm really good at compartmentalizing that because I know I'm there for the family and I'm there for that person. While I might feel sad on the inside and be grieving on the inside, I'm not going to break down because that family needs me. And I have the knowledge to be able to help. I have the experience, and that is my job. So I'm really good at standing beside the family and beside the people. But outside of that, when I'm away from the family after it happens, yes, I go home and I cry. And I've set some non-negotiables, as I call them. I have 3, and I think I've spoken on this podcast about before. First one is I meditate every single morning. I exercise almost daily, and I need daily time with my husband. And so these are the things that keep me grounded. So those are the things that are, self-care. I make sure I'm hydrated. I make sure I eat well most days. So it is about self-care. And if I'm taking care of myself and I'm healthy and I'm grounded, I'm going to be able to support the families that I'm working with.
I 100% agree. And the one thing that you'd mentioned that really struck me is compartmentalization. So I was a paramedic for 10 years, and whether I learned it there or I had it naturally, I have always had the ability to be present in the moment and do whatever it is that I needed to do without getting emotionally involved into what's happening. Doesn't mean I'm not feeling emotions. I do, because I'm an empath, and so I feel those things deeply, but I have the ability to put them in their place for the moment for when they need that. And I think you're going to find most death doulas or even aspiring death doulas are usually the folks that are good in a crisis. They're, able to keep calm. They're able to stay focused on what needs to be done. And then when the crisis is over, then maybe we go and fall apart. So that is definitely a huge aspect of just my ability to be extremely present and mindful when I'm with clients. I actually had a client say something interesting to me once. There was a friend that wanted to come visit, and the client asked me to tell the friend that it wasn't a good time. And we were talking later, and I said, I'm just curious why you didn't want your friend to come. And they said, oh, I love them to death, but they are so emotional that the minute they get here, they're going to break down, they're going to cry, and I'm going to end up having to comfort them. And that is not what I need right now. So definitely that's not what our role is, right? We don't need the family looking at us and worrying about us or wondering why we're so emotional when they need our support. So it is really extremely important to be able to be present. And the self-care that you talked about, like, which is sort of the next question. I also have a very sort of strict regimen of self-care. This actually started for me before I was a death doula, and I did this for my mental health. But again, I'm a yoga practitioner and a meditation practitioner, and I do that I'm an evening person. I do that every night before I get into bed so I can sort of clear my day. But staying healthy, good sleep, time with friends and family are just so important. And again, that comes to where your boundaries are. Set your boundaries, make sure they're very clear, and make sure you're taking care of yourself. And then allow yourself the time to feel those feelings once you're away from the family and the client, because you will need time to process. It's a very exhausting, emotionally, physically, spiritual job, and you do need time to process and recharge, because if your cup isn't full, there's no way you're going to be able to give more of yourself to those who need it.
Rae, I didn't know that you are a yoga practitioner. Why aren't we doing a yoga class instead of coffee when we meet once a month?
Uh, well, then let's do that, because I'm very much in it. I mean, I'm certainly not I'm not doing handstands and super advanced stuff, but a girlfriend of mine actually started a yoga business, and I started joining her classes as a way to support. And then she started teaching me more about the spiritual side of yoga and meditation as well. And then I was hooked.
Yep.
So anytime, I'm always happy. Let's do a class. I'm down.
Yoga for death doulas.
Yes. Why not? We do death over drafts. How about
Yeah.
death over yoga?
Let's see. What are some ways to stay informed and continue learning in the field of death doula work?
Want me to jump in here? Yeah. Well, we talked about this. I've mentioned it. If you want to become an end of life doula, you're going to have to be a lifelong learner. And you can go to a death doula class and learn the basics, as Traci had said earlier, about the scope of practice and all of that. But that's just going to be scratching the surface. There are incredible organizations that provide webinars. They have blogs, they have mentors and other instructors and other classes. There are death doula collectives. Traci and I met through, we both are part of the same collective. Mentorship, find those that have more experience than you and ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask directly, will you mentor me? You just have to, and then just, again, go to seminars, go to workshops, go to conferences. There's actually a lot more out there than you probably realize. And there's an amazing bunch of books and literature out there written by hospice nurses and other death doulas that talk about their journeys and their experiences. So I am dedicated at least once a week. I'm reading something, watching something. Give myself an hour once a week to continuing education.
You know, there are so many YouTube channels, and there are so many, like Barbara Carnes is an amazing person to look up, and I will put her site on in the notes. But Barbara Carnes is a really good person to learn from. Her website, also a Google alert. So a lot of things are happening in the news all the time because this industry, the death doula industry, is really starting to take off. And so I have a Google alert on for death doula and end of life doula. So whatever comes up in the news, I'm reading about it and listening to podcasts, listening to, watching some of those YouTube videos, and reading books. I love it. Every other book that I read is about something about death, and talking with people, I know, Rae, you mentioned there are a lot of conferences that go on, and the majority of them you could attend via webinar. So just and reaching out to people in your area also. You would not believe how many death doulas are in areas you didn't think that they would be. I'd say the last year or so in the Bay Area, there are so many more death doulas than there were before. And I look on LinkedIn and I look on like Alignable, and I reach out.
Yes.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
and I know people
Yeah,
have reached out to me also. So people who are already in this industry are so open to talking with people who are just starting out, and it's important that uh, we take and talk with each other and learn from each other. Because I know when I'm vigil sitting and a person needs around the clock care, I'm going to be calling on people that I know and that live in the area.
absolutely. Yeah, this one of the things that I have loved most about the community that I've met since becoming a death doula is, at least for me, 90% of everyone I met has been super collaborative and wants to share their knowledge and wants to learn from others, right? It's no matter how long you've been doing something, there's always something to learn. So it's, being a mentor or asking for mentorship is just so important. And the one thing I've learned about mentorship just in general is you have to ask for it. You have to reach out. You have to make connections, build relationships, and not be afraid to ask for what you need. You can't be too timid and expect people will come to you and say, hey, I would like to mentor you. Unfortunately, most of the time, that's not how it works. So not being afraid to put yourself out there and build connection and community and ask for help. And you will be really surprised that there'll be so many folks willing to provide it.
When I first started in this career path, quite honestly, I was really afraid to reach out to people. I was terrified. And then when I started to do podcasts, I was really, really terrified to reach out to people. And I just remember being like, okay, the worst that they could say is no. The worst that they don't respond to me or they say no. And I did have rejections, but is it really any so different than real life or any other career? No. So, and so the next one was about a mentor. So we spoke about that. Also, in any of the death doula schools that are out there, if you attend, a lot of them, as I said, have mentorship. And that's something that you should be asking. You should, because some of the schools are just an online course that you take and you really don't talk with people in your course, or you might just meet them once for a weekend at the end of the course. And then there are courses that, even though they're remote, you're meeting every single week. And it's so look for that.
Yes, I would have to wholeheartedly agree with that.
What are the career prospects for a death doula? Is it typically a full-time role or more often part-time? Okay, so I'll be honest here and say that it is not an easy path. Many, as an example, hospices see us as volunteers versus being someone to pay. And we could have an entire show on hospice work and volunteering. It is starting to become full-time. I am a full-time death doula, and I work very, very hard. I can say about 60 to 80% of my job is my business, is doing the marketing and doing the operational work, which is normal, I think, for a rather new business. But I do this full time, and so I do this full time. Most death doulas do not do this full time, I think. But the prospects are with the silver tsunami, as they call it, the prospects, I'm seeing it more and more, and I'm seeing this show up in more and more newspapers and in magazines, that death doulas are being mentioned a lot more. So I would say within the next 3 to 5 years that we will be much more commonplace.
I agree. When I got called to be a death doula, I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted in terms of building a business or joining a company. I just knew that I wanted to serve. But that certainly just wanting to serve isn't necessarily enough to pay the bills. So, as you mentioned, I think full-time benefited jobs with a company or a corporation or a hospice organization, those just really aren't there yet. I really do hope that, like you said, within the next 3 to 5 years, that health organizations, hospice companies, may actually start employing us as full-time employees. Otherwise, if you want to really monetize and support yourself doing this work, you really have to start your own business. And for me, like we discussed, is right now I'm only able to do this part-time. I do not have enough clientele yet to support my business 100% of the time. So I do work a day job. But my goal, and I think many death doulas' goals, is once they sort of realize what they want, is there are ways to make money. There are ways to do it full time, that you have to be extremely creative, extremely flexible, and a go-getter. Again, it's sort of like with the mentorship that I mentioned. If you're going to just sit back and wait for people to come to you or organizations to come to you, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to do the outreach. You're going to have to do the marketing. You're going to have to knock on doors and make phone calls and put yourself out there in ways that you may not be originally comfortable with. But there are other ways to monetize as well. I know many doulas who offer, they do public speaking or group education about their services or end of life issues or grief issues. They host webinars. So there's definitely different ways to sort of monetize and make money doing death doula work. But I will say that this is not a job if you are trying to get rich. You're not going to become a millionaire becoming a death doula. If you're lucky and you work really hard, you'll be able to build a really solid business with a solid clientele that will definitely pay your bills and keep you going. So you really have to think hard about what you truly want to get out of your business and out of the death doula work. And then again, make a plan, figure out what you do need and make a plan, and then just hit the streets.
Yeah. And to be fair, Rae, you just opened up your company. Your website just went up. So it is really, really new. But I can tell you that it will start opening up. And any business, this small business is no different than any small business. When I look at how much time I'm spending on marketing and operations, it's the same with every single small business. And every single business, it takes at least 3 years to get off the ground. The first year you lose money. Granted, we don't spend much, so that's okay. It's not like we're outputting $20,000 to open up a storefront. And then the second year you hope to break even, and then the third year you really start to see some revenue. But yeah, there it is not if you're looking at having a business up and running and supporting you within 6 months, you need to think about that and maybe start this as your side business until you're able to build up bigger.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And it's okay though. I love my day job, and it's really, really important that, I put the time and effort into building the business, and it'll get there when it gets there, so.
I ran off the deep end. I just ran and jumped off the cliff and into the water and said, I'm doing this. So,
kind of what I did. Got my training. I started getting some experience word of mouth and through friends. And then I just decided I need to do this. And that's what I mean. Like this is not for the faint of heart. Sometimes you just have to take risks, calculated risks for sure. But, you just kind of sometimes just have to jump in, pull off that Band-Aid and just go for it.
So we are out of time. I just want to do one more question. And so that question is, what has been the most rewarding aspect of being a death doula? So just one thing that you could think of. I know there are so many, but say your one thing and then I'll say my one thing.
The biggest reward that I've gotten, and this is sort of intangible, there is an incredible sense of gratitude that I get when I've worked with a family, and I've definitely like seen them all the way through. There's just this sense of gratitude and honor and that I just carry with me. It's what fuels me, and it's one of the biggest feelings that I get, especially after maybe a client has passed. I would definitely have to say that that sense of gratitude is the biggest reward for me.
That gratitude, same with me, that every single time I'm with a family, I feel so honored that they are allowing me to be with them at this moment. And sorry, I'm putting in a second one.
It's okay.
And I think I could speak for both of us in saying that doing this work, it really puts into clear focus on how I want to live and who I want to spend my time with, and how much gratitude I have for just my daily life. And that has nothing to do with, when I look at it, it has nothing to do with money I make or with things I have. And it has everything to do with who I spend my time with and those experiences. So I feel very fortunate.
Yes, I have to agree with that. Absolutely. It's a gift that we're given.
Yep.
It's the only way to describe it. It's just a beautiful gift.
Yep. So Rae, thanks so much for being here and sharing your insights with everyone and having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, could you let our listeners know how they can get in touch with you and learn more about the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I'm proud to say I've recently launched my website. So you can reach me at www.crossingtolight.com. I have a bunch of information there about what I do, and there's ways to communicate with me through the website. And you can also, if you're interested in social media, you can catch me on TikTok at EOL Doula Rae.
Folks, as we've discussed today, becoming a death doula is an emerging and vital field, especially as our population ages and the need for compassionate end-of-life care increases. This profession is not just about providing comfort in the final moments, but also about enriching the quality of life until the very end. It's a journey of profound human connection, empathy, and support. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions or if there's more you want to know about becoming a death doula, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this discussion to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.